Are we ready?
Just a minute. Just a minute. I'm now going to open the room. So give it a few minutes for people to come in. I'm starting the webinar now.
Okay. Tell you what, let's, I'll put a timer on here. Let's give them 1 minute to come into the room and then we will start. Are we ready?
Just a minute. Just a minute. I'm now going to open the room. So give it a few minutes for people to come in.
That's not live.
David, you're looking good. I'm glad to see you seem to be well connected today.
Thank you. My connection is much better now.
Oh, wonderful.
I thank God for that, yes.
Have you had an upgrade in technology, David?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Thank God.
This is much more stable.
Oh, it's, yeah, night and day.
Dean is looking chipper.
He is. He's looking fresh.
Yeah, he's in the afternoon for a change.
I think Brazil does that to you, though. There's the sunshine, the equatorial area. You know, all the plants grow like crazy, so why wouldn't people? Just saying. All right, so we've been a minute. I think we can, let's just take a peek at the, so we have about 16 participants with us now, including the panel lists, I believe. I think we can get started and I'll do the intro and then they'll hopefully all be in for the main event today. So welcome everybody. I'm glad to be with you today. November 22nd, this is our 5th installment of our series on Genesis with Rav Dov. And for those of you who might be coming in new, you are landing in a development of a 10-year process of studying the Torah together. Ruth, Yair, Dean, and I have been studying together for quite a while, and now we've made a lot of new friends in our study sessions, and we're just having a good time. So this is our 5th session in Genesis. And maybe just before I go into, I'm going to do a bit of an intro of what we discussed last week. I made some really pretty slides with a bit of artwork that I hope everyone's going to like. But I just want to share that why would we do this? We got basically 2 kind of religious streams here, Christians and Jews coming together, talking about the Bible. Well, I know it's shocking to believe, but we actually both believe in the Hebrew scriptures and the Bible. And we just are having a lot of fun exploring it together, studying together, learning to do also respect and honor with one another as we can share knowledge and explore God's creation and his wisdom. And I know I personally am very thankful for the opportunity to do this. And I know that that's the mindset of most of us on the panel. So with that, I'm going to do a quick review of our discussion on the Shabbat. And it looks like Francis just joined us. So I'm just going to share my screen. And if someone can just let me know the moment that they see my slides, then I'll know that I can get started here.
We see your slides. They're beautiful, amazing.
All right. So just as we get into this, I just want you to know that I do have permission from the artist who made any of the paintings that you're going to see and what I'm going to share. I got a hold of him last week and said, hey, we're doing some Torah study. I need some beautiful pictures. Can I use yours? He said, sure, as long as you just mention me at the bottom of your slide. So artlevin.com, I recommend you go check him out. He's got some really beautiful paintings. So last week, we were looking in Genesis, the beginning of Genesis chapter 2. And we were delving into the Shabbat. And Rav Dov kind of gave us a deep dive into a lot of different ideas. I'm going to go through about 5 slides here, which are going to cover, I think, the major themes of our discussion last week. So the first one is the theme of Shabbat in the Bible. And Rav Dov shared that it is mentioned 14 times. I didn't double check his facts, so I'm passing them on as stated. And of these references, 2 that we discussed were in the 10 Commandments. And one was in Exodus, and the other one was in Deuteronomy. And so, as you can see, my little candles here, my Shabbat candles represent those two references to Shabbat in this picture. And the first reference puts the Shabbat in the light of the creation of the world, of God's act of creation, and that Shabbat was like a stamp at the end of the process of creating the physical world. And then we're actually going to talk in just a minute about the creating of a spiritual dimension during Shabbat, which is a very interesting idea. And then the second reference in Deuteronomy was a Shabbat in the context of the equality of humankind, of mankind. And the theme or the symbol of that is deliverance from slavery from Egypt. And so we can kind of see here Shabbat contrasted and displayed in two different ways that teach us that Shabbat perhaps has many faces, and that we can learn about many areas of God's creation through Shabbat. So with that, we'll go to the next slide here. We also took a little peek into some of the word games that happen in Hebrew. And I just wanted to share with you a little slide showing how we can see the word Shabbat in Hebrew, Shin Bet Tav, is also embedded in Bereshit. And then we also see that there is a remainder, like a mathematical equation, that kind of pops out of Bereshit once we take out the letters for Shabbat, and we see it as the word Rei, which means mirror in Hebrew. And so one of, again, the faces of Shabbat could be that Shabbat is also some kind of mirror. It's a bit of maybe a mystical idea or understanding that we can look for in Shabbat. Now, one of the really cool details that Rav Dov brought up, you're gonna have to really look at this slide, okay? So you're gonna see on the right, you're gonna see Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, verse 2, and verse 3 put in lines. And I just basically stepped through the counting of the words that Rav Dov mentioned, hinting at something very interesting. If you look on the left-hand side, you're gonna see the word count for each of these lines. And you're gonna see the sum at the bottom being 35, which apparently is also the number of references to the name Elohim in the creation story. And so we can see kind of layers and patterns within patterns where the numbers, I think God really likes math, by the way. I think that's kind of a theme. Where we could see Shabbat, creation, God, reflection, deeper understanding. So here we go. On to the next slide. Now, the one clear literal meaning of Shabbat, from my understanding, is rest. And yet, when we're looking at God's resting on Shabbat on the seventh day during creation, there seems to be a bit of a paradox. We see that he rests from a kind of work that in Hebrew is referred to as malacha. And yet he does create the seventh day, and he blesses Shabbat, and he sanctifies Shabbat. And so in our theme of looking at the idea of blessing, we see that blessing is associated with a reproduction, with a creativity, with a capability to make offspring, to make more life. So we see that he's put that blessing in Shabbat somehow, and we come back to that in a minute. So he ceases to work in nature. Now we're getting into interpretive. I'm pulling from everything Rav Dov shared, that he ceased to work in nature, but he still continued to, in some way, create in a higher plane of existence, created a way of being and a reality of holiness, a way of being set apart. And that's part of where he's sanctifying the Shabbat, that we also learn as beings who get to learn about his Shabbat and get to grow in that. We can also learn about what it means to be set apart, sanctified, and to be made holy. So Shabbat is blessed with the power to produce. Rav Dov did share that this deep reality within Shabbat is available to the entire world, and yet there has also been an understanding and an exploration and an investment in Shabbat that is unique to the Jewish people, that is worth mentioning. And yet there are elements here that really are an inheritance and something available to all mankind. So I just did a little fun Hebrew play at the bottom here. I said ein avodah, which means no work, like your job. Ein malacha, which means no, creative work. I'm not totally sure about the subtleties of the differences between those two words, but no crafts, no creative work. And then I said aval yesh melachim savivnu. So, but there are angels all around us, and it's a word play on malacha, melachim. They're kind of they're associated in the Hebrew language. So I thought that was cute. All right, Cam, I thought you would like that one. So, all right, the next slide, I wanted to just show a cycle. I know that the fonts are kind of small here, but it's kind of more for the aesthetic. That Shabbat is meant to create a consciousness towards purpose and meaning in all the other 6 days of the week. And so that is part of the holiness and the setting apart of Shabbat, is that it has a sacred purpose in terms of unlocking, unleashing, enabling us within the other days of creation. If we look at Genesis chapter 2, verses 4 through 7, it teaches a synergism and an interconnectedness that we didn't see in Genesis 1. Where we see in Genesis 1, each day there's creation, there's a declaration of Tov, that it is good, and then there's also blessing given in specific instances, but there's not this interconnectedness and interrelationship. So we see that in Genesis 2. In Shabbat, we see the emergence of this dependence, interdependence, interrelationship between man and creation. And I would say an elevation of the sovereignty and responsibility given to man in creation. So we see that thriving, purposeful vegetation needs the blessing of water, which comes forth from the earth, and the efforts of humankind. And humankind also have been brought forth from the earth, from dust. And then God breathed life into dust. And so we can see this relationship, which I represented not only by a cycle of days, as you can see here, the 7 days of the week, but also this cycle of life in a way. Genesis 1 reveals a hierarchy of power and sovereignty, which I just referred to. And Genesis 2 reveals the collaborative relationship between God's creation. All right, so that's it for that one. And then here we have the question of the real blessing. And so on the 7th day, he creates the real blessing of communion, of coming together. Gathering in the Jewish community, gathering around the Shabbat table to sing, to study, to ask, to respond, to answer, and also to connect. And so, Rav Dov mentioned that this is not malacha. This is not, the work that is not, that God is not encouraging on the Shabbat. It's a blessing by savoring the wisdom of how God created life and how he has integrated the different elements of his creation. And in closing, he insists that everything he created come together in relationship to release the blessing and the thriving that he intends. And we can see these things within the Shabbat. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and pass the floor on to Rav Dov, and glad to start discussing.
Okay, Gabriel, that was pretty amazing. I keep on saying it takes me about more than an hour to say what I want to say, and then somebody comes on the week after and does it in 10 minutes. I say, wait a minute. That was really, really amazing. I love those slides, those beautiful slides that you put on the background there. We got to find out who this, what was it, Art Levine? That was his name?
Yeah, that's right.
What was his name?
artlevine.com, yeah.
Wow, that was pretty amazing. All right, so good evening to everybody and everyone out there, wherever you are. And again, you're all invited to, as we go along here, to send through the chat, send your questions or comments, and we'll stop somewhere in the middle to see if there's anything that we need to respond to. And as we go along, I'm going to ask our astute and wise panelists to get involved here as well this evening. I'd like to begin actually by referring to something that Gabe said. I didn't really plan to talk about it, but I think it's very important to make this point clearly about the Shabbat. We're going to talk about the Shabbat this week and next week as well. Two very different facets of the Shabbat that really correspond to the two different frameworks of the Ten Commandments. As Gabe said, the Ten Commandments in Exodus talks about the Shabbat as a jogging of our consciousness that God created the world. And the Shabbat, as it's described in Deuteronomy, talks about the social meaning, the moral meaning of Shabbat as creating a dimension of equality between human beings. And so we're going to separate these 2 weeks. Today we'll talk about the creation of the world, Shabbat as a reminder of the creation of the world, and next week about the more social dimension, the more moral dimension of the Shabbat. But before we get to that, I just want to make a very short dash to the sidelines and make it just a very clear distinction between two different words that Gabe mentioned that perhaps were not as clear as they should be. Avodah in Hebrew, which I mentioned, also has the word eved, which means slave in it. Avodah can be translated as labor, especially physical labor. That's why the word eved as slave is built into the word avodah. The Torah doesn't say that you're not allowed to do avodah on Shabbat, although it's taken for granted that you can't do hard physical labor on Shabbat. The Torah makes a point of saying that on Shabbat you can't do malacha. And as I mentioned last week, the word malacha is connected to the word malach, which is a messenger or an angel. And malacha is a directed, creative, innovative human creative act. I'll give you a very simple example. I said a very big sentence there. I don't know if you got all that, but I'll give you a very simple example, which I think will help us understand this. Let's say I've got a guitar. Some of you may like to play guitar. And, and one of the strings are broken. One of the strings got cut off. I don't know why I played it too hard and the string sort of came apart. And I want to put one of the strings back on. You get this thing on the side, you turn it, you slide the cord inside and so that the guitar can work again. And so the laws of Shabbat say you can't do that on Shabbat. Wait a minute, that doesn't take a lot of calories. That's not a lot of hard labor to, fix my guitar, to put another string in the guitar. It took me about 10 minutes. I bought it, not on Shabbat. I bought it on Thursday. I bought the string, the E string on Thursday. I just want to, string it up again. No, you can't do that on Shabbat. Why? Okay, get this. Because before I put that string in, I don't really have a guitar. I can play it a little bit, but it's not really a guitar. It's almost a guitar. By putting the last string in and tuning the string, I turn this piece of wood, into a, can you hear me out there? I turn this piece of wood into a guitar. And so the law says, the Shabbat law says, that's a malacha. That's a creative human act. By taking this piece of wood that looks like a guitar, but you can't really play it, okay? You can't really play this guitar. And by putting that string in and tuning it, I've really created a guitar out of this piece of wood, even though it was almost a guitar. But that final effort, it's not really a physical effort. It's sort of a creative effort. It's finishing up the transformation of a piece of wood, a natural object, into a humanly functioning object, which is called a guitar. And so that's a malacha. Again, that's not physical labor. That's not very hard. I can do that without sweating a lot. But that's really a creative human act because I spent a lot of time learning how to play the guitar and, learning those chords and whatever. And when I put that string in, wow, I've got a guitar. So that's, and I'm trying to explain a little bit, maybe it wasn't too clear, the difference between physical labor, which is called avodah, and what the Shabbat concentrates on, which is demanding of human beings not to be humanly creative, not to be creative in a way that human beings especially know how to transform the natural world into civilization. Anything that we do to transform the natural world into civilization, even by that tuning the guitar, well, that's a malacha, because it's very clearly defined, it has an intention, has a goal, and it transforms an object into something that I can use. Okay, I just want to say that, and I hope that was clear, because that's going to be very important later on in our discussion. And I want to begin what I wanted to share with you this evening. I want to begin by going back to something that we've already looked at, but it's sort of the gateway to our discussion this evening. Let's take a look once again. We never get tired of it. If you could open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 2, and we'll read once again something that Gabe definitely emphasized, the story of the Shabbat as it's described for the first time in the Torah, Genesis chapter 2. And I'll just read it through again. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their host, meaning the heavens and the earth, everything that filled the heavens and the earth with a host. And by the seventh day, God ended his work in the natural world, as Gabe explained, which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his malacha, from all his creative work to create everything that was in the natural world, which he had done. And then what's important for us, once again, is that God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. And I want to talk some more this evening about this very, very obscure phrase, God blessed a day and sanctified it. We talked a little bit about a blessing, which is clearly to be understood as God placing the powers of life into the world and on the Sabbath. We don't have a clear explanation of sanctification. Talked about one possible understanding last week, and I want to say this very, very clearly. This is something that may be a little confusing for some of you. Like, we read the Bible as an invitation to create understanding. We read the Bible as an invitation to create human understanding. And sometimes that seems a little confusing. Why? Because we already made a suggestion as to what the meaning of God blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it last week, and Gabe summarized it by talking about how in Genesis 2, God talks about the world as being a place where creativity and the continuation of life depends on give and take between the creation, and not just each creature standing on its own. And that's clearly part of the Shabbat. Now I'm going to suggest two other explanations today. And you're going to say, wait a minute, Rabbi Dov, don't confuse me. Give it to me straight. Give me one answer to that. What does it mean, bless and sanctify? Okay, well, as I said, the Bible is a book that to be opened, and interestingly enough, it's an invitation for deeper and deeper human understanding. It's an invitation to see a number of layers of understanding. And all of these, just as the Bible talks about the Shabbat as a reminder of the creation of the world, and if you got that straight, well, then in Deuteronomy, the Bible says, well, it's a reminder of the days that Jewish people were redeemed in Egypt from slavery, so we should understand that all human beings are equal. Well, God, give it to me straight. Don't get me confused. Is it this or that? Well, God himself talked about the Shabbat in two different ways, right? So I hope you'll allow me today to take you on a journey of understanding God blessed and sanctified Shabbat in another way. And we'll see how all of these different interpretations really come together and create a very beautiful picture of the richness of this day. Okay. So let's read once again the 10 Commandments that describe the Sabbath. And that will be in Exodus, the first description of the Sabbath and the first 10 Commandments, in Exodus 20. Open your Bibles, please, to Exodus 20, chapter 20, verse 8. Verse number 8. And I'm going to ask one of the panelists here to read it. Again, Exodus 20, will take a few seconds to everybody find it in your Bible. Exodus 20, verse 8. The 10 Commandments as they were given to Moses at Sinai, given to the Jewish people. And this is the middle of the 10 Commandments. Shabbat is right in the middle of the 10 Commandments. Anybody would like to read it, please? Verse 8.
Let me read it. Let me read.
Was that David?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days.
Go on, Ken.
Should I continue?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
6 days. Sorry, let me repeat. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates.
Yes, please go on.
Okay. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
All right, we have a lot of words here that remind us of Genesis, of the Sabbath in Genesis. The Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. The Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. And it's for that reason that we should remember the seventh day, and we should keep it holy. And all our household should be celebrating the Sabbath, should be celebrating the Shabbat. Our children, even our animals, everybody that lives with us. It's a day that should be celebrated together because God created everybody. God created all human beings. God created the animals. God created everyone. And so we should all be aware of the fact that God created the world and rested on the seventh day, and therefore he blessed and sanctified the seventh day. And the question that I want to spend some time with you this evening talking about, what does it mean? What does it mean that we should remember that God created the world? Why is that so important? What is contained in that consciousness? We should be conscious of the fact that God created the world. What does that mean? What is it? Are we supposed to think about the galaxies? Are we supposed to think about the fish in the sea? What are we remembering, and how are we keeping the day holy by remembering it? And there are many, many possible ways to understand that. And I'd like to introduce you to a suggestion that at first sight seems very strange. A suggestion made by one of the greatest of all the rabbis of the Talmud, perhaps one of the greatest rabbis of all of Jewish history, a wise, very wise individual, very wise man named Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva lived around the year 130, 140. He was put to death by the Romans. He lived perhaps apparently in the time of the New Testament, more or less, if I get that straight, around the year 130, 140. And he was one of the greatest of all interpreters of the Bible, the creators of Jewish tradition in many, many ways. And he suggested a very, very, what seems to be a very strange interpretation as to what it means that God blessed the Sabbath, Shabbat, and sanctified it. And he said, and this will connect us to the idea that God created the world as well. And he connects us to another section of the Bible, which we're going to spend some time on right now. And many of you are probably familiar with it. He suggests that we should go to chapter 16 in Exodus. He suggests that blessing the Sabbath and sanctifying the Sabbath has to do with the manna that the Jewish people ate in the desert. And at first sight, again, it probably seems this sort of takes you a very long, distant direction. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with the creation of the world, with sanctifying the Sabbath, with Genesis 2. This doesn't have anything to do with anything. But if Rabbi Akiva thought that it did, it's a good idea to spend some time trying to understand what he meant. And so I'm inviting you now in to reading Exodus 16. We'll begin with verse number 2. It'll take a little while for us to read this chapter, but we need to read most of it. And we'll stop along the way to see what is actually taking place, what's transpiring here. It's immediately after the Jewish people have crossed the Red Sea. The Red Sea has been split in two. The Jewish people, for the first time, have entered the desert. I'm going to invite one of the panelists to read from verse 2. Chapter 16, verse 2.
I can do it.
Okay, Ruth.
Can I do it?
Ruth,
Okay, just one verse.
verse 2.
Okay. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness.
And go on.
And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger."
Okay, we'll take a break here for a minute. Imagine this, the Jewish people saw the 10 plagues. They just emerged through the splitting of the Red Sea. I mean, what else do you have to see to believe in God? To believe that God's going to help you? You know, but immediately, as soon as they enter the desert, they're complaining. Right? They remember the flesh pots in Egypt. What do you mean the flesh pots in Egypt? You were all slaves in Egypt. That's true. We were slaves in Egypt, but when you're a slave, you know, even though it's hard work, but you get to eat every morning and evening, right? Every morning and evening, whatever, because your master wants to make sure that you eat well because you need to work tomorrow. So you get a lot of good food, right? But what do you mean? They're complaining. We had our full of bread. You brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Let's leave that question like hanging out here in front of us. I mean, I thought the Jewish people, you know, were the people that love God. Why are you so, you know, unthankful, ungrateful? Okay, Ruth, let's go on. Verse 4. Okay, Ruth?
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily."
Let's go on a little bit.
And Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, "At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us?" Also Moses said, "This shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord."
Okay, Ruth, could you skip please to verse 11?
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God." Keep going.
Yes, please, Ken.
So it was that the quails came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer for each person, according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent."
Okay, let's skip it. We're almost finished reading this parts of the chapter here. Let's skip to verse 21.
So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need, and when the sun became hot, it melted. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." So they laid it up till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is Shabbat to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Now it happened.
Go ahead, one more sentence, yes.
Now it happened that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you on the 6th day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth, for a beautiful reading. Let's try to understand this story that Rabbi Akiva sent us to. It seems that God gave the Sabbath to the Jewish people before they came to Sinai. That God says to the Jewish people, the first thing that I want to tell you about, the first thing that I want to teach you about your relationship to me has to do with the Shabbat. Okay, and the way I'm going to do this is by giving you food. You're afraid, you come out into the desert and you don't know where you're going to get your food from. You don't have any fields, it's not your land. You left Egypt where your masters would give you food, and now you're afraid you're not going to eat. And you complain to Moses and Aaron, and you say, "Let's go back to Egypt because we don't have any food." Okay, well, I'm going to give you food every morning. You're going to go out in the morning and gather up the man that's going to be the result of the dew somehow laying across the land, and you'll have enough for everybody. Everybody will be able to pick up what they need. And not only that, says God to Moshe, and Moshe says to the Jewish people, "I'm going to do something very special. I'm not going to leave you with just picking up the man every day, which I could do. And, I'm going to answer your needs. You need food, I'm going to give you food. But no, I'm going to give you food in a very special way. On Fridays, on the 6th day during the week, I'm going to give you a double portion. And I'm asking you to go out, when you go out into the field, when you go out into the land, into the desert, each one of you will pick up a double portion. There'll be enough for everybody to take double, because you're going to take enough for Friday and for Shabbat, because I don't work on Shabbat." What I mean? God says to himself, God says to his people, "I don't work on Shabbat. I don't create man on the Shabbat, right? And so I'm going to give you a double portion on Friday, and I'm going to invite you to copy me, to imitate me. And so you're going to go out on Friday and pick up a double portion. And unlike every other day, it's not going to rot by the next morning, right? And it's going to keep very well. You're going to have to bake it and boil it on Friday, so you'll have enough for Shabbat. And on Shabbat, you'll have enough. And so you'll be able to rest. You too will be able to rest, and you won't need to go out into the field, into the desert, to pick up your man on Shabbat." And then I say to myself, first, why does Rabbi Akiva Why is he sending me to this story? Why does he think that God blessing the Shabbat and God sanctifying the Shabbat has anything to do with story? And more than that, and I guess this is connected to it, I asked myself, well, why is God putting the Jewish people through this test? Why is God using the Shabbat to test the Jewish people if they believe in him? And how is he doing it? Why doesn't he just say, listen, do you believe that I created the world? Do you believe that I took you out of Egypt? And the Jewish people will say, yeah, I believe it. Sure, you're my God. Hallelujah. You're my God. I believe you created the world. I believe you took us out of Egypt. Everything's fine. No, that's not enough for God. And God says, I'm going to put the Jewish people to a test. And the test is going to be a test about Shabbat. And the way the test is going to happen is through this very complicated story of the man. And it all happens before the Jewish people even come to Sinai. They haven't even heard about the Shabbat. They don't even know that there's going to be Sinai. They don't know there's going to be commandments. This is the first time that God says, in a relationship with me, there's God's word, and you need to follow my commandments. And the way I'm going to teach you this is I'm going to teach you about the man. That's this great, wise Rabbi Akiva sends me to think about those questions. And I'm going to make a suggestion as to what I think Rabbi Akiva wants to invite me to think about. My dear friends, I don't know about you, but for me, it's much easier to believe in God sometimes than to believe that tomorrow I'm going to have enough food to provide for my family. It's much easier, even sometimes, to pray and to do all the right things and get in touch with God. It's much easier than to really have such a sense of economic security, such a sense of everything's going to be okay. God's going to take care of me. I don't have such a great job today. Am I going to have food to give my family tomorrow? Well, God says, listen, I want to teach you. I think Rabbi Akiva is saying to us, listen to what God is saying about the Shabbat. Listen to what God does to the Jewish people when they pass through the Red Sea, right? And they certainly believe that God took them out of Egypt, but they're afraid they're not going to be able to eat. Think about that for a moment. Think about how deep is human fear about insecurity, about whether we're going to have enough to eat tomorrow for me and my family, right? Wait a minute. Now I think about it, it's very interesting. God's first commandment to Adam in the Garden of Eden was about what you're supposed to eat and what you're not supposed to eat. Eat from all the trees, eat from the tree of life, and don't eat from the tree of good and knowledge of good and evil. Somehow God seems to be saying to us, to human beings, there's something about the human need, the human desire, and the human need to eat that really controls your sense of the presence of the divine in the world. It's not just enough to say, as the Bible will say in the Ten Commandments, God rested created the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh day. Well, I believe that. I read the Bible. I believe in the Bible. And I crossed the Red Sea. But as soon as I crossed the Red Sea, I remember how good it was to eat in Egypt and how I don't have anything to eat out in the desert. Well, how am I going to live? How are my children going to live? Well, God says, well, do you believe in me? Do you really believe in me? Because creation of the world means, and this is what I think Rabbi Akiva wanted me to understand, that believing that God created the world is not just a belief about what happened 6,000 years ago or whenever. It's not a belief about that God did in the past. It's about what God does for me today. God is creating my world today. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes I don't have a great livelihood. Doesn't make any difference. God is creating the world today. That means God is creating livelihood for human beings in the present. And you have to believe that. That's what it means to believe that God creates the world in the present. In the present. Rabbi Akiva says, you know what it means for God to bless the world? It means for God to give enough. And God does that for all of us on Friday, at least in the story of the man. God in the story of the man gives us a double portion. Why? That's blessing. That's the blessing of the man. That's the blessing of the man. The blessing of the man is God's gift of life, is God's gift of bread, is God's gift of double bread. Some of you may know that in many, many families that keep the laws of the Shabbat, in each of the meals of the Shabbat, we take 2 loaves of bread, 2 loaves of challah, specially made, tasty bread, because we want to remind ourselves that the blessing in the world is a double portion of bread that God gave the Jewish people on Friday. And then Rabbi Akiva says, you know what it means to sanctify the Shabbat? It means to stay home and enjoy the double portion that you got yesterday. It means don't go to work. Don't go outside your home to look for your livelihood. Don't go outside your home to make, a better salary on the 7th day. Stay at home and enjoy the benefits of the food that God created for you. And that's what Rabbi Akiva means, it seems, when he said, when God blessed the Shabbat and sanctified the Shabbat in Genesis, well, I'll show you how God operates in the world, even before God commanded the Shabbat. God operates in the world by creating the constant blessing of life, livelihood, food for human beings. It should only be B'ezrat Hashem. We should see that in our life, in all our countries, wherever we live, for all our families, for all the people around us. We have a double portion on Friday, and on Shabbat, we stay at home and enjoy what God gave us during the week. And that's to sanctify the Shabbat. That's not to do creative work, not to go out and create livelihood, create my food, create my salary, change the world for my benefit. Stay at home and let the world be and enjoy what you got, what you received from God during the 6 days and the double portion, the blessing that he gave you. That's what it means, according to Rabbi Akiva, that you are supposed to remind yourself every Shabbat that God created the world and sanctify the Shabbat, sanctify this day, in the consciousness of the fact that even on this day, God is continuing to create the world during this week for me in my livelihood. And that's a continuation of the meaning that God created the world. And we learn that from the Manna story. That's what Rabbi Akiva suggests to us. Okay, that's an interesting idea. Another thought, another interpretation. What's interesting about it is that, in fact, this is the first time that God really commands the Jewish people about Shabbat. And it's even before he commanded the Shabbat in the 10 Commandments. He says, I'm opening the gates to Shabbat, and I'm going to tell you how you really understand the underlying meaning of God created the world. And that's the story of the man. And Rabbi Akiva saw that. And he's pointing a finger for us to see that. I'm going to ask our panelists.
Can we bring in a question?
Sorry, King. Sure, Gabe.
Can we bring in a question? So
Sure.
During the discussion, Dr. James asked what the Torah would say about work related to treating the sick on the Sabbath. How would that be any different from other work?
Okay, James, that's a wonderful question. In fact, there is a whole section of Jewish law about that particular question. There's a very, very fundamental principle in Jewish law that says that except for some very unique, exceptional cases, saving somebody's life takes precedence over all Jewish law. That's number one. If we're talking about someone who's sick in a very serious way, and even if it's a, how should I say, a safek, if there's a question, a possibility, we're not even sure that this person is in danger of losing their life, but there is even a small possibility that he may be in some kind of danger, in his sickness. You can do anything. You can violate the Shabbat. Not only are you allowed to do it, right? It's a value. It's a positive principle. It's a divine commandment as understood in Jewish law, to violate the Shabbat to save life, because that's what Shabbat is all about. It's about the creation of life. And as the Talmud says, we want to violate this one Shabbat so that this person can celebrate many Shabbatot. What about a case when a person is sick, but he's not really in danger of his life? Okay. It's a flu. Somebody has a flu. And it's not, kind of serious corona or anything like that. It's just a flu. He's going to be better in a couple of days. What can we do? Well, certainly you should visit him and should be with him and should talk to him, make him feel better. But again, I don't want to get into all the details here, but there are many, many laws that you cannot do. You have to fulfill the Shabbat because the person is going to, he's going to be in good shape at the end of Shabbat anyway. But there may be certain things, I don't want to get into all this detail, certain more lenient, more smaller violations of the Shabbat, we'll call it, that you are allowed to do. So that the Jewish law is aware of the fact that the purpose of Shabbat is to preserve life. And so someone who's sick, again, depending on the level of his sickness, that will determine whether you can violate the law, and if you can, how much of the law you can violate. But that's definitely a very important aspect of the law of Shabbat. Thank you, David.
Yair I think Yair wanted to make a comment.
Yes, Yair, please.
I thought that this is an opportunity perhaps to mention, I remember one of the most amazing Shabbat experiences that I had was when I was in the IDF, and we had to do all kinds of activities on Shabbat in order to protect the nation. So
the IDF is the Israel Defense Forces.
Right. So if we would go out, we would have to get into our vehicles and go out with our armed and do whatever is necessary in order to protect the country. But while we were doing that, we would typically sing the songs of Shabbat or talk about the Torah reading of that Shabbat. In other words, while recognizing that life is above the laws of the Shabbat, we still try to remember the Shabbat and make it a very memorable and remember the Shabbat, like it says actually in the Ten Commandments. So it's an interesting way to make sure that we preserve life on the other hand, and therefore we have to do certain things, and at the same time to sanctify it. Even while you're doing those things, to add that element of sanctity so that the Shabbat is sanctified.
So thank you, Yair, for that beautiful story. I'd like to turn to our panelists with a question that's related to the ideas that Rabbi Akiva wants us to think about. I want to know, what is it? What do you think it means personally to you to think about the notion that to be conscious of the fact that God created the world really means something much more down to earth, something much more relevant to my own personal being, and that is that I should feel secure that God is creating the world continually. God continues to create life, and the outcome of that is that I should feel secure about the fact that God will be giving me and my family food, will be giving me blessing. I don't need to work on the Shabbat to make my living. And God will provide food and blessing for me and my family. And that's part of the sense of believing that God is the creator of life. It's not an easy, it's much, again, I say it's much easier at a certain level to believe that God created the world than to go along with such an idea. And I'd like to turn maybe to anybody, if we have time for one or two of you, to make a comment. Say, what do you think what does that mean to us? Is it relevant? Is it meaningful? Is it something that that I accept, that I believe in? And if I do, well, how does that play out in my life? Anybody in the panel wants to talk about that, please? Okay, Ruth, please.
So it means something to me because I've been a Christian all my life and I've always believed that God created the world. But I'll give you one little example. So one of my sons this year was going through a series of difficulties with his work and not having enough money to feed his family. His business was shut down because of Corona. And one day he said to me, Mom, sometimes I think I'm a failure. And I guess in a way it kind of made me panic because I didn't know what to say and I couldn't fix anything for him. And it was a challenge to do exactly what Rabbi Akiva said, which was to believe that God would provide for him tomorrow, even when I could do nothing to help him.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for that beautiful story. Yes, that's what Rabbi Akiva was asking us, inviting us, sometimes in very difficult circumstances, as you described, to rely on the creator of the world to give what we need. It may not be everything we want, but to give us what we need. Thank you very much. Anybody else, please, would like to make a comment, talk about this? Yes, Francis, please. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Dov. Thank you so much, Rabbi Dov, and everyone. I think the subject of the Sabbath is a very broad and as well very deep subject. As we've seen from the scriptures, God blessed it, and from the explanation you've given us, Rabbi, blessing is the giving of life. It is what gives life. So we derive life from the Sabbath, and he also sanctified it, he hallowed it, he set it apart, made it holy, which points to me, I see the principle, the concept of salvation there. God separated this day so that, like you said rightfully, not just believing, but appropriating the faith that we have in the God who created the material world from nothing. In the event that there is lack in any material way, we believe in this God that he's able to supply. But now the other days, there is a text in the New Testament where Paul says, whatever you do, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your heart as unto the Lord. So when we are working, we still work with the belief, with the faith that even when I'm working, it is the Lord, it is God who is working in me or enabling me to work or to be productive. And so the very basis of my work outside the designated Shabbat is actually Shabbat. It is actually from that faith that gives me rest, to the extent that if the work of my hands does not necessarily meet the needs, like you said, I still believe, I still have faith in him who started the work, who did his work and completed. And And I have the basis to continue to believe, even when my eyes cannot see or my hands cannot be as productive as I would want to be productive. So for me, this is my take that Shabbat is about the faith I have in the creator of the material world and the salvation that he gives to us and enables us therefore then begin to work alongside with him to be productive and add value to the material world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for extending our understanding of these ideas into the weekday, into our creative work on weekdays as well, to carry the Shabbat into our creative work during the week, and to do our work as Hashem would like us to do it with a Shabbat consciousness. I'd like to continue to one other text this evening that will complete these ideas and really help us understand in a very, 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 I think, a very deep way about about Rabbi Akiva's understanding of the special quality of the Shabbat. I'd like you to turn, please, to a text in the prophets, something that we haven't seen very often. A text in the prophets in Isaiah, chapter 58. And I'll take a minute while you're finding the text. Chapter 58 of Isaiah, interestingly enough, is read in the synagogues by many communities on the holiest day of the year, on the day which is a 24-hour day of fast, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And on that day, interestingly enough, we read this chapter as a way of understanding the nature of holiness. What does it mean to be a holy human being? And how is that connected to the Shabbat and to the ideas that Rabbi Akiva has already invited us to think about? And with your permission, I'd like to read chapter 58 in Isaiah. Cry aloud, says God to Isaiah. Spare not, lift up your voice like a shofar, and show my people their sins, and the house of Jacob their transgressions. Yet they seek me daily. They desire to know my ways as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me judgments of justice. They desire that God should be near. It's a people that is looking to be close to God, to understand the ways of God. So why is the prophet speaking about their sins and transgressions? I'm continuing with verse 3. And the people say, now it's the voice of the people talking. Of course, it's the prophets speaking about what the people are saying to themselves. Why have we fasted, they say, and you see us not? Why have we afflicted our soul, and you have taken no knowledge of us? And the answer goes like this. Behold, in the day of your fast, you pursue your business and exact all your payments. You ask for all the people who owe you money to pay you back. Behold, you fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. You fast not this day to make your voice to be heard on high. Is such the fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call that a day of fast? An acceptable day, a day that the Lord accepts? Is not this rather the fast that I have chosen? To loose up the chains of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry? You bring the poor that are cast out to your house. to see the naked, that you cover him, that you should not hide, that they should not hide themselves from your, that you should not hide yourself from your own flesh. Now, this is an amazing kind of a thing, an amazing kind of a prophecy for people to read on the day of the holiest fast during the year. Because the prophet is saying, dear friends, fasting and asceticism is not the story. That's not what will bring you close to God. Yes, fasting is important because fasting indicates how much you are giving up your own need for pleasure, your own self-interest. But if you leave it at fasting and think that fasting by itself will bring you close to the Lord, you miss the whole idea of what it means to come close to God. Because, and we have to catch the irony of the story here, because the irony is that God is saying, the prophet is saying to the Jewish people, it is not the fact that you don't eat that brings you close to God, but it is the question of what you do with your food that brings you close to God. How you use your food, that's what brings you close to God. Do you give it to a person who doesn't have food? Do you use the day of fast to become a day in which the whole community looks around for who are the people who don't have clothes, who don't have food, who don't have enough to eat, who don't have livelihood? Do you use your fast, right, to unloose the bands of servitude? Do you use the fast to search for those people, right, who are exploiting, manipulating, controlling for power and for self-interest, and saying to them, on the day of the fast, we're going to say to you that you are the wicked, and what you're obligated to do with your money and with your food is to give it out to the people who don't have. And that's what a day of fast is for. A day of fast is to understand what food needs to be used for. It's not just the asceticism. It's not just the separation, the giving up of your need and desire to eat. That's important. But if that's done by itself, it can become an ego trip, an ego trip of sanctity. And what prophet is saying is that sanctifying food is finding someone who doesn't have it and giving it to them. That's how you sanctify what you have. Okay, that's the first half of the chapter. What does that have to do with Shabbat? So far, nothing. But the amazing thing about this chapter, this prophecy of Isaiah, is that it moves on to talk about the Shabbat, as if a Shabbat is a higher form of holiness than even a day of fasting. Do you want to come close to God? Well, further, that's the first step. The first step is what you do with your food on a day of fasting to give it to those who don't have. And then the chapter moves on to the second half of the prophecy, which will talk about a higher level of what you do with your food to sanctify life on the Shabbat. And so, with your permission, I will continue, and then I will stop at the end and offer the panel to respond and to ask and to talk about it. Maybe anyone out there around the world who has any questions or comments, free to write in as well. And we're in verse 8. Suddenly, I would say that the quality, the sense of the text changes radically. And rather than talking about the wicked and what they do in the fast, suddenly the text says, the prophet says, then shall your light break forth like the morning, and your health shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of God shall be your rear guard, will be supporting you. Then shall you call, and God will answer. You will cry out, and he will say, here I am. Not because you're fasting. You think that just the fast itself will bring God close to you and God to respond to your needs? If you take away from the midst of you the yoke, the pointing of the finger, speaking iniquity, and if you draw out your soul to the hungry, satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall the light rise in darkness, and your gloom be as noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy your soul in drought and make strong your bones. And you shall be able to be like a watered garden, like a spring of water. And you shall be, and they shall be of thee, shall build the old waste places, shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of path to dwell in. And then the prophet says in verse 13, if you restrain your foot because of the Shabbat, for pursuing your business on my holy day, and call the Shabbat a delight, in Hebrew, oneg, which is the word for pleasure. You should call the Shabbat a pleasure, a delight. The holy day of the Lord should become honorable, and you shall honor it, not doing your own ways, nor pursuing your business, nor speaking of vain matters, that shall delight thyself in the Lord. And I will cause thee to rise upon high places of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Yaakov your father. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. My friends, this prophecy has become one of the basic frameworks for the Jewish people to celebrate the Shabbat. Because it says, use Shabbat to enjoy yourself. Use Shabbat to have pleasure. In the Hebrew, which doesn't come across so strongly in the English, in verse 13, the prophet says, Karata l'Shabbat oneg. You should call the Shabbat a day of pleasure. What do I mean, a day of pleasure? Isn't that the opposite of asceticism? Isn't that the opposite of what I understood? How do you become close to God? You give up pleasures. You give up the pleasures of the flesh. You give up the pleasures of this world, and you come close to God. That's what I do on a fast day. That's why fasting is so important. Well, no, says the prophet. First thing I said was how you use food on a fast day to give those who don't have. But now I want to tell you that a higher dimension of holiness is the Shabbat. The Shabbat is holier than Yom Kippur, than the Day of Atonement. Because on Shabbat you use pleasure, the blessing of God, the food that God gives you, to enjoy the blessing of life. You celebrate life on Shabbat. Gabe, you may know, because you visited a family on Shabbat, that on Shabbat we sit around the table and we don't just sing, and we don't just tell stories of righteous people and learn Torah. We eat the best food, the most tasteful food that we eat all week long. We make, it depends on what community you come from, but you eat, 5, 6 different kinds of salads. You eat the best kind. You eat very tasty. If you eat meat, if you're a vegetarian, eat the best kind of vegetarian food. You eat the best kind of desserts. And for married people, believe it or not, says the Talmud, this is the best time to have marital relations, because we're celebrating life on Shabbat. God has created life not for the purpose of separating yourself from it, but God is giving life to sanctify it, which means to celebrate the beauty of the blessing of life. And that's what the prophet says, V'karata l'Shabbat oneg. Call the Shabbat a day of pleasure. but that's so anti-religious on a certain level. I mean, is that that's what a religious person is supposed to do in this world? Well, if it's Shabbat, yes. If it's, every evening during the week, absolutely not. If it's, celebrating with I don't know what, with beer in the bar every Tuesday night, maybe not, probably not. But if it's Shabbat, to remember that God created the world, that God created life, not just because of what you believe, as Ruth said. If you're in difficult circumstances, God will help you. But you believe that everything you have in your refrigerator and everything you have in your cupboard there, in your aron, everything that you've got is from God. And he wants you to have it. Because Shabbat, as many of us say, is like the Garden of Eden. God wants to say, eat from all the trees and eat from the tree of life. And as long as you know the boundaries, you know what not to eat, you know what kind of work you're not supposed to do, you know the boundaries of Shabbat. Okay, sanctifying Shabbat is not just what you don't do, but sanctifying the Shabbat is what you are invited to do with life. To remember that God created life. And that's what the prophet says in these two sections of the chapter about fasting. Fasting is not the story by itself. It is important if it goes along with dealing with human suffering on the fast day. Then it's helpful. And then the prophet says, but there's another level of holiness, and that's the Shabbat. As long as you don't do business on Shabbat, and you don't talk on Shabbat like, I don't do business, but I talk to my friend about my stocks. Okay, don't talk about your stocks on Shabbat, right? Concentrating on the life that God created for you on Shabbat, and celebrate it even in pleasure. And that's a higher level of sanctifying the Shabbat. That's what Isaiah is teaching me. Yes. Yair, please.
I think that there's one verse in Deuteronomy that summarizes everything. There's so much of what was just said, and it's very much also in the spirit of what Francis said earlier. And I'm going to be reading from chapter 8 in Deuteronomy, verse 3. He subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your fathers had ever known. Why? In order to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but that man may live on anything that the Lord decrees. In other words, what I'm taking from this, and it connects, of course, the manna and what you just read from Isaiah, is that God is trying to teach us that life that we spoke of, the blessing, the blessing of life is not just let's say an animalistic life of being able to eat and to live a life, but that God is trying through the Sabbath to teach us that there's a much higher level of life that is in relationship with the source of life, that is with God himself. And if we follow in the ways of God, and we do so, and we can actually have all the pleasures of the world, but we do it with God being there. It's almost like it's the fourth commandment of the Ten Commandments, because the Ten Commandments is kind of it's kind of an agreement between Israel and God, what this relationship is going to look like. So God says you have to dedicate time for this relationship. Like a married couple, you don't spend quality time together, then what is this relationship about? So God says, one day a week we have quality time together, and we enjoy all the fruits of your labor together, and we remember that the food is not there just for us to eat and enjoy, but that the food is really there to make the world a better world, to make sure that other people can also enjoy living in this world. And that raises the quality of our life, that life that we spoke of, to a much higher level. And this verse is almost saying that he made us hungry in the desert, and he gave us the man just for that, to teach us that if we use our lives in order to live in accordance with God's will, then those hardships will also disappear. God will be there for us. He will also make sure that on Friday you'll have double portion, just like he promises with the Shemitah that we'll have a triple portion before the Shemitah year. It's like God is saying you have an option not just to live in an existential way, in a material way, but to actually live in a very higher spiritual realm that will make also the material living so much richer and enjoyable and meaningful. And that's what the Shabbat, I believe, gives us, according to this verse in Deuteronomy.
Thank you very much, Yair, for those beautiful thoughts. We have time, I think, for one more person. Anybody else would like to take us
Kim, please.
in words to the kind of things we just talked about, to what it means for you personally, what you want to talk, how you want to use it, talk about it.
I would like to say something. That was a beautiful.
Kim, I can't see you, but I hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Okay. I was actually meditating on this particular passage the last couple of weeks because there was a word that struck me, and it was about the delight. The word about delighting in my Shabbat and delighting in my ways, Hashem's ways. And I was reminded of a passage in Tehillim in Psalm 37, where it says, and it's familiar to many, it says, delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. And all of a sudden there was this click that a lot of times we ask the question, what does it mean to delight ourselves in Hashem? And here I am looking at the Shabbat and I'm thinking, wow, this is one aspect of how, or even not even just an aspect, a major aspect of how we can delight ourselves. So when I looked it up, I found it to be interesting because it said a couple of more things. It says, commit your ways unto the Lord. I'm reading the English version, of course. Trust also in him. And there, Yair, you were just talking about Devarim. And he shall bring it to pass. And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light and thy judgment as the noonday. It's the exact passage we read in Yeshayahu, we read in Isaiah. Then it says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself because of him who is prosperous by the way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. Then you have the wickedness again. And then, of course, trust in the Lord and do good, so shall you dwell in the land and you shall be fed. So when it was just, I was really, when you brought that up tonight, I thought, oh, it's amazing that this connection, normally you wouldn't see this connection with the Shabbat in Psalm 37, but it's
Absolutely.
amazing. I think this is what Melech David, this is what King David was speaking about. So
Absolutely. That, Kim, that chapter 37 in Psalms is really it's almost like a twin chapter to this chapter in Isaiah. Absolutely. And I really thank you for reminding us of that. And anybody out there who would like, after we finish here, to take a look at the chapter that's the first part of that chapter that Kim just mentioned. Again, it's Psalms 37. And you'll see really a parallel to the same language and the same ideas and the same thoughts that we're just talking about this evening. And thank you very much, Kim. And I'll hand this back over to Gabe because I think we're almost at 10:30.
Yeah, we are almost at the end of the time. I wanted to maybe use the last couple minutes here to get to two questions from the audience.
Sure.
That are outstanding. So the first one is from Bordes, and his question is is God saying that sanctification is a work in progress or a continuation of something that should be remembered and to be blessed as a pronouncement or declaration of his approval? That was Portes's.
I'm not 100% sure I understand exactly, but what I understand, I would say it's both. That is to say, there is a need to make a declaration, to make a statement, to testify about my belief, about my understanding, and to make a declaration. Many of us on Shabbat say a prayer called Kiddush, and the Kiddush is we say it over wine and over bread, sort of the sanctified objects, and we make a declaration of our belief that God created the world. And in that sense, that's a very critical aspect of saying who we are and what we believe in. But again, besides that, that's certainly not enough. It's also a work in progress. It's also something, as Francis talked about, something that we take from the Shabbat into the week. It's something that deals with our consciousness of our livelihood, of our sense of security in the world, no matter what's happening to us. As Ruth described, it's something about how we celebrate the Shabbat, how we as Yair described, how we know how to take the pleasures of this world and not run away with them, not become obsessed with them, not let them control us, but allow them to be a gateway to our sense that God created life. And in that sense, yes, it's a work in progress as well. So if I did understand your question, I think it's both of the things you talked about, both a declaration and a work in progress.
Excellent. And we have one more question by Lily. And her
Okay.
question was, is this us being totally dependent on God for every day, even when we do our work for 6 days, and so we celebrate and delight in his goodness and faithfulness on the 7th day?
Well, my easy way out is to say, Lily, that's what we're going to begin talking about next week. But and so I'm inviting you to come back next week because we're going to talk about that. But let me say quickly, I don't want to, I don't want to be unfair. Well, for sure, we're invited we're blessed with our creative abilities. We're blessed with being created in the image of God. I think Francis sort of intimated this. We're blessed with being able to create, to work, to each one of us in our own way. And we're invited to do that during the 6 days. The question is how we do it, how we relate to other people, why we do it, what's the purpose? What are we trying to create when we do it? What are the areas of our creative work? How do we feel that we sort of connect with God's creations when we do it? All of these kind of questions we're going to talk about next week when we talk about the broader, the social idea of Shabbat and the connection between Shabbat and social equalities. And we're going to talk about the sabbatical year as well, which is another way of talking about how God invites us to be creative and to be autonomous individuals that create, and yet to do everything with a divine consciousness. And we'll get to that next week. Bezat, please God.
Mhm.
And so Lily, please come back.
Yes, please do. I agree. All right, we are just slightly over our time today. Thank you, everyone, for your contribution. We're going to be back next week. We're going to dive in deeper. And as your moderator, I just want to wish you a good week, good meditations on everything we've discussed. And one of you is probably going to do a summary for next week. So we'll figure that out this week.
And as long as you bring some beautiful slides along with it, but you don't have to.
I'm not trying to set the bar too high.
You don't have to be as good as You don't have to be as good as Gary.
Awesome. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you.
That was good eating. Thank you, Dr. James, for the webinar. Bless you all.
Yes.
You're welcome. Blessings.